Good. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me for this session. I know you must be tired after this awesome day of awesome content, so I really appreciate you showing up here. So thank you for that. Last year, I went to, I know it's purposely black. I'm sorry. Maybe confusing. It's on purpose. Thank you, though. Oh, this is going to be interesting. Do you guys hear that sound, or do you still hear me? You hear me? Perfect. So last year, I had the fortune to go to New York and visit Madame Tussauds. Anyone ever tried the Void, the VR experience? No? Oh, it's awesome. If you ever get the chance, go try it. It comes in 2 flavors. One is a Ghostbusters, and one is a Star Wars saga. So you can actually be a stormtrooper. But in New York, I could become a Ghostbuster. How cool is that? So in this VR experience, we are teamed up. So we have 14 members, and we are geared up. So we get a proton pack, and we get a gun and a helmet. And the helmet is, of course, the VR headset. And I should probably not say this, but when they were gearing us up and they were releasing the backpacks, I was like, oh, did they have to make it so realistic and heavy? Turns out that was a computer. Yeah, I wasn't that smart then. So now I know it's a computer. So we were sent into an apartment complex, and we were going to hunt ghosts, like you do as a Ghostbuster. And we are actually able to open physical doors in the virtual reality. We could feel the handles, we could feel the door we can walk through. We took an elevator, and you could feel the vibrations in the floor. Kind of cool. And at one point, there was a ghost flying towards me, right through me, and I could feel it. Not a pleasant thing. I don't recommend that. At one point, stuff happens. I mean, there are ghosts involved, so stuff will happen. Bad stuff happens. So we are on the top floor in a very high building in New York, and the wall just explodes. And there I am, standing on the ledge, looking down on the streets of New York. And then they tell us, we have a voice like a command thing in my ear, and they tell us, you need to walk over to the next building using this little plank I have set up for you. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. So at least I will try. I know this is just VR, and I feel like a little wobbly, and I can hear it creak. I'm like, nope. So I actually cheat, so I know how they did it. They have fans blowing in your face, so you know that there's actually wind. But it was so good. I was so scared. I kid you not. This is about how it looked, and they wanted me to just walk over to the next building. No, not if you're afraid of heights. But it was an awesome experience. The material was perfect, but there was some glitches. At one point, I look over to my teammate, and she has a gun going through her stomach. Doesn't feel natural to me. And when she was walking through one of the doorways, she was kind of halfway through the door, halfway through the wall, and she wasn't even a ghost. So it was a little bit awkward. And at some point, I look over to one of my other teammates, and he's walking like really, really strange because the tracking was a little bit off. And don't get me wrong, if you ever get to try the Void, do it because it's amazing. But it could have been better with just a few tweaks. And we live in such exciting times right now. We have cool new technology popping up left and right. We have cool new ways we can augment our experience and interact with our experiences. But this is also why UX is so much more important. Because if your UX is a little bit off, it can make your users sick to their stomach. So it's very important here. Something is going on. Let's do that again. Yeah. So I will go through the differences in AR, MR, and VR. So augmented, mixed, and virtual reality. I heard a phrase from a friend. He called it RR, real reality. Yeah, I like that. We will also scratch the surface on what can go wrong and how we can fix that. And I have a few pointers you can keep in mind to better the experience for the user. And many things may vary from platform to platform, but I still think we can learn from each of the platforms, no matter what platform we are actually deploying on. My name is Jessica Engström. I'm a Windows developer MVP. I was about to say Windows Phone. Does anyone have Windows Phone still? No. Oh, one. You lucky. You're so lucky. Yeah, I'm jealous. I run a company together with my husband, who's actually in the audience today. We call it Future Tech that we work with. Really what it is, it's everything that's fun. So it's VR, it's AR, it's AI, it's all the buzzwords, and UX. Because we see UX as a future technology as well, because it will become so much more important every single day. Because again, if you're a little bit off, you can make your users sick. I'm also the co-host of a podcast called Coding After Work, so if you like podcasts, feel free to check that out. So as I stated, there's a lot of realities out there. And one would think that these realities are fairly new, right? We're just starting to use them. But both virtual and augmented reality has been here for a while. Back in 1584, a scientist wrote, "How we may see in a chamber things that are not. How we may see in a chamber things that are not." And this is the first known description of an illusion trick called Pepper's Ghost. So now Pepper's Ghost, we know that we have been using since 1862. This is 20 years before we get the car. We had AR before we could drive. That's like crazy, right? I find that so interesting. So Pepper's Ghost is used in television, it's used in amusement park, it's used in exhibitions, and you have probably seen some form of it somewhere. And it's been around for a while, like I said, but if we skip forward a few years to 1962, we get the first multimodal immersive machines called Sensorama. So this is a mechanical device. It's a stereoscopic 3D, kind of wide angle, especially for the time. And it had body tilting, so you could actually sit and move while you're watching a movie. But it also had wind and aromas that you could trigger throughout the movie. I think today we call them more like 4D, 5D, 6D, 7D. I don't know how many Ds you can put in that, but you know what I mean, right? Yeah, awesome. Which is kind of fun as well. But this was in the 60s. They had that. In the later 60s, Ivan Sutherland, he created what is widely considered to be the first VR and AR head-mounted display. And this contraption was called the Sword of Damocles. I mean, the name, I love that name. And as you see here, it's kind of crude, but I mean, it was also 1960s. So we still had, I think, there we go. Look at that graphics. All right? I can do that today. No, I find that really cool. So we had that in the 60s. So if we jump forward a bit till the 90s, we get virtuality. And this is the larger VR gaming machines, I would call them, that you found in arcades mostly, because they were probably not that cheap. And kind of funny looking as well. Now, 2013, we get Google Glasses. And from there, things are starting to speed up at a really fast pace. We have Oculus Rift, we have Magic Leap, we have HTC Vive, we have basically every single thing that we have today. And it's going really, really fast. But one very interesting thing is this. This is the Meta 2. It's kind of using Pepper's Ghost, the technique we talked about or written about 1584. And this is one of the most advanced augmented reality headsets we have today. Isn't that fantastic? How did they know? I mean, sure, they didn't have electronic screens. They had like a specialty room, but it's still the same technique. So I know that most of you probably know the differences in all of these, but to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind, I will still go through them just a little bit quickly. So augmented reality is, as you all know, when you augment the reality with digital stuff. And when Pokemon Go came, it kind of became mainstream. Everybody knows what augmented reality is now. Of course, there are more advanced augmented reality, well, in this case, a helmet and a pair of glasses, and we saw the Meta. This is more towards the industrial use of things, so it has a really ruggedized glass, and it has a thermal camera and things like that, and it's not that cheap. It's not for me, I could say. It's a little bit steep. But then again, it has special functions for the industry. So we have a different kind of spectrum on augmented reality. And then we have virtual reality. And this is when I, as the user, step into the virtual world and immerse myself completely. So I see nothing of the real world. And I mentioned the 90s arcade earlier, right? This is how it looked. He is encapsulated in this circular contraption. But if you look closely, he's also strapped in with a belt. Because this was dangerous stuff. You see here? He has a belt, which is connected to the backside of that circle. And this is what it looks like today. If you look at the guy on your left side here, he is so immersed in this game, he's actually leaning on the virtual pool table. So maybe being strapped in wasn't that bad of an idea? Yeah. So mixed reality is when you mix these two worlds. You have virtual objects that you can actually interact with, and they can interact with the real world. So you can actually put something on the table, and it knows that this is a table. HoloLens, Meta, Tango, ARKit, just to name a few of them. And then we have these. These are, I would call them virtual reality headsets, but they are also called mixed reality because they are using the cameras out here to track the surroundings. So you don't need any lasers or cameras to track you. So they are using the real world to anchor you to the virtual world. So that's why these are also called mixed reality. Some confusing, but still. So now that we all know the differences in these realities, it's time to get to work and identify our experience. And here you need to think hard and long on what type of experience you are developing. I tried NASA's destination Mars one time, and it's really, really cool. They have taken images from the Mars orbiter and from the Mars rover and built up Mars. So I can actually walk on Mars. And if I see something that I wonder about, like there's a crack here, I can interact with that, and it will give me information about that crack and what does that mean for me. Also, Buzz Aldrin was there. Well, as a hologram, but still kind of cool. And he was telling us a lot of cool stuff about space and Mars. But you are fully immersed in this world. And they are using the HoloLens, which is more mixed reality or augmented reality, if you will. So this would have been so much better suited for virtual reality because it doesn't take any advantage of the platform that HoloLens is. It doesn't recognize that this is a table. In fact, they were putting us in a very dark room with black floors and ceilings and walls and everything. They even had to put in like orange or yellow squiggly lines so the HoloLens didn't get confused because it was so dark. And this is what I mean by you needing to identify what type of experience you are doing. Do you want to build up a whole world, or do you just want to augment the reality? Now, being that we have so many devices coming up, and it's still coming out as we speak, it's super important that we identify the tech we are going to release on as well. Because there isn't one VR experience or one AR experience anymore. So we really need to think about that as well. So think about where you want to be, what tech is going to be used. But if we look at this from the 2D aspect of the world, I was going to say, we can design one app or one experience and basically deploy it on as many platforms as we want, with little or no harm. But that's not a good idea in VR, especially in VR, but same thing goes for mixed reality. So the solution you write and the hardware you choose to release on can make all the difference, and it can also help the user not feel nauseous or the other way around. So we know the tech. Now we need to know what play area we have, because that also differs between virtual reality and virtual reality. Not one platform has the same play area to use. There are a few different types of areas that we can have, like stationary, for instance. This is when you either just sit down or stand up, but not walk around that much. And that's one way of doing it, right? You can have everything coming towards you instead. And then we have the location-based room scale, which is where you put up a custom rig, kind of like the Ghostbusters. Or even if you have a museum and you want to explore the world's past, and you can even have a physical chair bolted down to the floor, and you can overlay that in the virtual world with a throne. So you can sit there and be royalty for a while, right? Kind of cool. And then we have the more common room scale version, which is when the user can walk around freely within the tracked area, like HTC Vive or Oculus Rift, if you will. But the actual tracking between these also differs. I think the HTC Vive can track up to 15 by 15 feet, and the Oculus has a little bit less, and also depending on how many cameras you have and so on. When you are developing for a tethered device, a device that's actually connected to a computer, it's good to think about that as well, so you don't have the user bursting out, trying to run and catch something, so they actually yank down your computer. I would totally do something like that in a game if I had to. I mean, it's all about the gamer points, right? Yeah. Oh, you feel me. Thank you for that. So that is something we need to keep in mind as well. If you're developing for augmented reality, usually you don't have any tethers to a computer, so you're more free to do whatever you want. The HoloLens is using something called world scale, and this is, it has 4 cameras here, environmental sensing cameras, so it completely scans the room constantly. So it can keep track of whatever your furniture is, it can identify them, it knows where you are, and it knows where the holograms are towards you. So you can actually move around the actual holograms, so you can see them from different aspects. And they will stay there, basically forever. We have been to places that we set up a couple of holograms, and then we come back 6 months later, and they're still there. So they are basically permanent. So now that we also know the play area, how does the user move within the area we just defined, right? So we have gamepads, and that's a classical way to play games, right? And most of the platforms will actually work with a gamepad, so that's nice. We have teleportation, where we need to move longer distances, but we don't want the user to actually be able to walk or have to force them to walk that much. So we can project a beam. This is from HTC Vive, the lab. You can project a beam on the floor, and when you press a button, you will automatically just transport there. And there's another, this is from Batman Arkham VR on the PlayStation. You see some predefined areas throughout the world with a little controller and a bat, and you know that you can instantaneously go there. You don't have that many choices, you only have the predefined areas, but it's still a very easy way to let the user know where they can interact. I would say that both are easy to use, but the one where you actually teleport, like the HTC Vive, is a little bit trickier to learn for beginners than this one. But still, as long as you show them how to do it, feel free. Then we have physical movement, where we actually can move around within this area as well. It's a good idea to sometimes shorten the distance the user actually has to walk, so it looks like they're walking further, because, well, again, we are tethered sometimes, so, and also we don't want to force them to walk like a mile just to get to the next village, unless it's part of the gameplay. So what you need to do is decide whether you want to use one or the other, or actually implement a couple of them, the ways to move in the game. So now we also know how to move. It's time to look how we interact with the world. With all these new mediums, we also have new ways of interacting, both human interactions, but also new controllers. They're not necessarily super new, but if we compare that to our 2D world of things, we have interacted with the computer for 30 years in a 2D world, it's kind of new anyway. So again, we have the gamepad, the controllers, but we also have, this is the HoloLens clicker, and then we have the HTC and the Oculus specialty, or what you will, hand controllers as well. And since all of these, no, not all of these, since some of these devices are Bluetooth enabled, more and more are actually getting Bluetooth enabled, you can use regular mouse and keyboard. Mouse and key? Yeah, that's something you do. So mouse and keyboard. But then again, you need to think about if you're in VR and you have a computer, well, you have a keyboard or a mouse, might not be the best idea. But it might be if you're doing mixed reality, for instance. So it's good to think about. For devices that's using hand tracking, we can use gestures. HoloLens, Intel, and a few others actually have put a leap motion on their headset so they can track your hands in VR. Then you can use tracking. Was anybody here earlier when Jimmy was doing his talk on HoloLens? A couple of you. Okay. So as Jimmy said before, this is a kind of easy gesture. This is what we have shown probably about 3,000 people on the HoloLens. You put up your finger, you click them together, and you lift it again. But it's not that easy, because we have seen the angry duck, we have seen the Pac-Man, we have seen the worm, and we have also seen move every single finger but the one you're supposed to. Why am I saying this? Because it's obvious to me how you do this. I've been using this for years, but it might not be obvious for your users. So you need to think about that as well. Some games and apps have implemented their own version of interacting, like this Superman flight. That's kind of cool, right? Yeah, unless you need to stand like this for a couple of hours in the game. You can get a little bit strenuous on your arm. So a little word of caution when it comes to implementing your own non-standard versions of these. Like I told you about the HoloLens, might be obvious to you, but it might not be obvious for your users. But I don't say you shouldn't use that, because this is really cool. Imagine using the Force in your game, right? I see a couple of geeks here. Awesome. But use it sparsely, so you know that the user won't get very, very tired, and also it will become so much cooler when you actually get to use that. So that's a good thing to have in mind as well. Gaze is basically where you look if it doesn't have eye tracking. Some devices do actually have eye tracking, then the gaze will be where your eyes are looking. Otherwise, it's where your head is looking, so it will just track your head like this. You basically have a beam from your head. Yeah, like this. Looks like he has a laser vision, doesn't it? Yeah, I like that too. But it can be a good idea not to execute on every single move on the gaze, especially if you are just new in the game and you're swooping over, want to look at this beautiful world you have built up, and you have menus popping up and playing sound every single time you look over the world. So it's better from a UX perspective to actually make sure that the user wants to click on this or interact with the elements. So maybe you can have like you know those little circles that if you look at it, it will fill, and you know when it's full, you will click. Those are great. So that's a good thing to think about. Well, they're at least better than implementing click on everything. So. Voice is another way of interacting, and some of these devices actually have voice implemented into them from the beginning. And you should really make voice your best friend, because we already know how to speak, most of us. And we type about 40 words per minute on average, but we speak around 150 words on average. There's actually people who can speak 300 words per minute. I'm not that. I speak fast, but not 300. So even an expert typer will be more efficient if they are speaking. So it's so much easier just for me to say, take a picture, than actually trying to navigate a full set of menus. And this is also why Siri and Cortana and Alexa and all those is getting so popular, because it's so convenient. You should think about the language design, but that's a completely different topic. But at least the most of the platforms actually help you with that, so that's great. So we know how to interact with the world, but how does the world interact with the user? There's many different ways here. Being that we are in these immersive worlds, it's getting a little bit harder for us to catch the attention of the user. So we have to work a little harder. We don't have that set frame that we're used to, where we can just put all the menus to the left side or things like that. We could, of course, just put things on the camera, so we attach it here, so it's just following around the user, but that's not really comfortable for the user. Actually, it might even obstruct your cool world you have built up, so that would be a shame if you worked hard on that. And also it can make your users cyber sick from that, having things going on up here all the time. So we don't want all the information all the time on screen. It will become cluttered quite easy, and also we don't know which way the user is actually facing. So unless you are designing for Iron Man, I don't know how he handles this, but he is a superhero, so of course I don't know. Or the content doesn't have to be on the screen every single moment of the time in the game. Use contextual menus and contextual options, but also be careful with that, because there are a few caveats to this as well. The Destination to Mars demo did this beautifully. I went over and I looked at something and I can interact with it and I get the menu, and I click something in the menu and I get the sub-menu, and I'm still right here. But I've seen really beautiful designed menus. So I again look at something over here and it swooshes up. Orbs like fly out like this, really, really cool. The problem is, I'm over here and I want item number 5. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of a sudden I have lost the context completely. So that's not good. So you need to think about the contextual menus and sub-menus and things like that, so it will relate. You will keep the relationship between the items. If you have informations or labels that you need to put out in the 3D world, place them on the same z-axis as the object, even if it's actually halfway obscured from some angles, because it will be so much easier for the user to find them, and it will also feel more natural that they're actually on the same z-axis, I should say. So how do we catch the attention of the user? Well, there are a few tricks. Visual cues are a good example. Like you have a pulsating aura or something around the object. Or, well, like I just did here, something blinking. But make sure that you don't do this. If I was turned around and I didn't see the blinking, and I look at it, I see nothing. So make sure that the user can actually see it if they missed it somehow. We also need to think about, or apply some spatial thinking when we are designing for all these realities. Because we have a completely different canvas than we are used to. And one thing will be more important than it ever has been, and that is audio. If you have multiple objects that can play audio, place the audio, attach it to the objects themselves. So it will actually, I will actually hear if it's from above or below or from my left and right and so on. And that will actually grab their attention. They can just turn around because they know the sound came from behind them, right? Then we have gaze again. We can use that for navigation. Usually you do that more than actually using your own hands. So another thing that will give us a more physical sense, if you will, is a phrase I first heard John Howard use, haptic audio. I know, you can't touch sound like that, but if you give your objects a lifelike sound, like are you running on grass? Are you running on snow? Or is this hollow or not? That will help the user to know which objects they can interact with. It will feel more natural, and they might even know if they can actually pick it up or not. So that's good. Haptic audio. Well, so designing for a 2D world, we have learned lately that we should be genuinely digital, meaning no skeuomorphism, no looking like leather or bookshelves and things like that. But in the 3D world, that's exactly what we should do. We should mimic the 3D world, our real world, RR, if you will, the real reality. And in Unity, you can actually utilize 3D sound very easily. If you saw Jimmy's talk this morning, you saw how easy it was. It was basically a couple of clicks and then you're done. And you will have really cool sound effects. For HoloLens, they are using something called HRTF, so it's head-related transfer functions, which is basically a way to get a full 360 surround sound using just 2 speakers or headphones. Same thing goes for audio cues as for visual cues. We need to make sure that the user is actually hearing what we're doing. Or if they actually can trigger something that leads to the next level or things like that. So a good practice is to use steps of 3 in these cases. So perhaps you're in an antique shop or something and you're about to be invaded by a horde of rats, because why not? It's VR after all. So first you can have just the one rat running over the counter so you can hear his little paws. Do they have paws? Yeah, let's call them paws. Sounds a little bit too cute for a rat, though. Yeah. But then, if I don't hear that, I can have a couple of them running over before I hear the whole herd coming at me. So I know I'm under attack by these cute rats. They're not cute, right? Sometimes, as a joke, VR is referred to as vomit reality. Yeah, you're laughing. How many of you have tried VR? How many of you have ever had a little bit headache or felt a little bit nauseous from it? Yeah, that's like 75% of you. So it is really important that we think about how we are making the UX in this case, right? We don't want them to feel sick. The fact is, though, that we have not yet cracked the nut that is motion sickness or cyber sickness in this case. We have some theories and we have some solutions, and I mean, this is a fairly new medium after all, so we are actually writing the rules as we go. So we are doing the user research, we are doing all the science things, and writing the rules as we go. So it will take a while, I guess. But there are 3 prominent theories to the cause of cyber sickness. The first one is poison theory. And this is based on that we have hallucinations in VR. And your body goes into survival mode, so it tries to expel that funny mushroom you had earlier, so therefore you feel sick. So we don't want that poisonous stomach, or poisonous mushroom, that is. Then we have the postural instability theory. And this is based on that the main goal of the human body is to maintain postural stability throughout as many environments that it's possible. So prolonged instability of your posture well, it's said to induce cyber sickness as well. So quick changes or accelerations and stuff like that in VR can cause postural instability and therefore also cyber sickness. And the third theory is sensory conflict theory. And this is based on that the 2 key sensory systems, the visual and the vestibular system, they provide information about the person's orientation and perceived motion, and also the mismatch in these 2 systems. So what's going on here is that the vestibular system says that you're stationary, I'm sitting right here, but your vision is saying, no, I'm out flying. So you have a mismatch, and therefore it can cause cyber sickness. So we have to try to work around this as much as we can. What we do know about cyber sickness is that there are a lot of individual factors going on here as well. So for instance, children between the age 2 and 12 have the greatest susceptibility to cyber sickness. But as they grow older, that will rapidly decrease. So that's good. We have another theory, study that's been done. Women in general has a wider field of view, and that means that we are more susceptible to flicker and therefore also more prone to be cybersick. And research has actually shown that female hormones can have an impact on cyber sickness as well. So, I'm sorry. Underlying illnesses or hangovers, if you have the cold or things like that, can also increase the susceptibility. I don't know who wants to go on VR when you're hungover though, but someone might, I don't know. But even your posture, if you're sitting or standing, if you're slouching or not, can have an effect on that as well. So that's something you can try out if you're feeling sick. Just stand up or sit down or something like that. Latency and flicker can also induce cyber sickness. And this is why it's so important to actually test this on the actual device that you're going to release on. Not your monster machine that you're actually developing on, but the actual device. How is the user moving around? Are they riding a train or a car, for instance? Are they sitting down in the couch and not moving a muscle? I mean, we could be safe and just have them stationary at all times so they can sit down and everything comes to them, right? But what's the fun in that? If you have built this beautiful world that you can explore, you want to explore it, not sitting down. So if you have the time or the budget for it, you could enable more than one way of navigation in your game or app, because this will enable more people to choose what they are comfortable with, but also it will make your app or game compatible with more devices. So that's good. Free roaming in games, like I said, is fantastic. You can walk around and look at all the amazing stuff. But some will get sick from that. You can try to fix that by giving them a virtual body, like the Ghostbusters, for instance, that experience. You will have a physical body, well, a virtual body. But that only works if it's done right. If you are, by accident, just rendering a little bit under the floor, for instance, that's going to be worse. Or if you have like a much taller avatar or a shorter avatar, or don't follow the movement, try to force the movement of the user, it will also get a little worse. Same thing if you have that jumpy going on like my teammate in Ghostbusters. She was not having a good day. First a gun, and then no. Poor girl. Some people prefer a third-person view in games to not get sick, so that's something you can do as well. And if you put your user in a vehicle and they're not the driver, please show the road. This will help them a lot, actually. And this actually works for real as well. Do we have anybody who's motion sick in cars? Yeah. Does it help if you see the road? Yeah, for me as well. Well, it doesn't cure you, but still feels a little bit better. So it's the same way you can do here. I have a friend called Max, and he has done a really cool game on HTC Vive called #Archery. And they were trying this game out. Every single update they did, they tried it out on users. But all of a sudden, people were getting sick, and they were complaining about, no, 5 minutes and I'm out. So what happened was that in the game, they had a moving truck that you were supposed to stand on and do stuff. And what they ended up having to do to counteract that cyber sickness was locking the rotation space, locking the rotation of the tracking space, I should say. So kind of like an accordion bus or an articulated bus, if you call it that. Do that, and it will apparently help a lot of people. Acceleration is also one of those things that can cause cyber sickness. So if you have a very fast acceleration, try to ease them into that instead. Or you can use blink or transportation, like teleportation, if you're not doing like a driving car game or things like that, of course, then it would be kind of boring to have a teleportation, right? Kind of miss the point. There are so many individual factors to this that can affect your experience, and we are taking away so much of the interface from the user's actual face, which means that we need to put much more time into user research. And also testing, of course. And testing should never, ever be skipped when it comes to augmented reality and mixed reality, and especially not in virtual reality. Testing should preferably be done really early and very often so you can catch things before it becomes really bad, or you have invested too much on a specific thing you need to remove later. And it's also best to actually test it out on your target audience. Are you doing a child's game? Have children test it and so on. It's so much better than having your teammate who's very used to virtual reality testing it out, because he already knows how to do it, and he's probably getting used to it much more than your newer users. There are a couple of other tips that we can keep in mind for better the experience for the user. And especially these new platforms, there will be users that had never tried this before. So ease them in to VR, and also out of VR for that matter. Don't just drop them smack in the middle. I had that happen to me once. Someone fired up, they were doing a prank on me because heights, I don't like heights. So they just fired up the game, put me in a world, and I was standing in a freaking tree, very high tree looking down. And that was not pleasant, I can say. And I'm used to VR. So what you could do is do like Oculus, if you have tried that. They have a home screen where you are still in VR, but you need to actively click on the game to go into that. That is easing into VR, and that is so much more comfortable for the user as well. Tutorials. This is very important because there will be new people that never tried this. And make sure that you don't show the tutorial only once. Make sure that they can skip them if they have seen them before, but they can also find them again if their friend is trying it out, and so on. And this is super important. If you're going on an elevator ride or a balloon flight or something like that, you can have a still focal point in the background that the user can actually focus on. This will help them not get motion sick again. So that's a good thing. Still focal point, you can still move. It's also a good idea to let the user know if they're coming very close to the wall or things like that. Now, most platforms actually handle this for you, but if you are handling this yourself, make sure that you warn them before they run into the wall. And this will also make them trust your solution much more, which means that they can immerse themselves even more into your game and have a better experience. In mixed reality, like HoloLens, for instance, we have a field of view about a printer size if you hold it up, like in stretched arms. And to counteract that, we can either make the objects smaller, or we can put them a little bit further into the world, just to be able to see the whole hologram. But I will also say that your brain is fantastic, because when you have used this for a while, you no longer think about the actual field of view. You automatically back away a little if you see that the actual hologram won't fit. And your brain will stitch everything together, so you will perceive it like you are watching everything in a complete 360 experience, but you're not. Also, if you're getting chased and shot by robots, you will not go, oh, look at that small field of view. You will go, ah, like this instead, or try to shoot back or something. So, smoothing should also be your best friend. So now you have two best friends, voice and smoothing. Because especially when it comes to gaze, if you're handling the gaze yourself, it will go like this. It will be so much jitter. Because even if I try to keep still, my head is still bobbing a little bit. We don't notice it, but we will when we see the cursor. So that's why smoothing should be your best friend, if you're handling that yourself. And don't pull the cord when you're getting them out of VR. That will be a little bit uncomfortable. I personally like the one when you fade to black when they are trying to exit your game or solution. So fade to black, and then they're out. It takes like 1 second longer, but they will have a so much more pleasant experience. So to sum things up, identify the experience, the tech, and the play area. Think about the interaction both from you to the user and from the user to the world. How are they going to interact? And make sure you try to make it as comfortable as possible for as many people as you possibly can, so they don't get sick. And if there is only one thing that you should take away from this talk, it's testing, because you cannot test these things enough. And I mean, you can't tick all the boxes, can you? So keep testing, and you will come pretty darn close, I would say. But where are we heading with these techniques? So let me take you to a possible future game, or a game in the future, if you will. So I want to relax with a nice, relaxing game of horror. Yeah, what's more relaxing, right? So I find myself standing in a field of grass. I can actually smell the grass. I can feel the wind in my head, on my face. And I see a weeping angel. Now the game can measure whether my palms are sweaty or not. It can measure if my pulse is rising. It can even measure if my breathing is getting shallow. So if I'm playing this game, and my friend who's a scaredy cat is playing this game, we can have the exact same amount of scariness, because it will adapt. So if I close my eyes or blink, the game will know that and adapt. And I can feel the spit on my face from the weeping angel as she hisses and coming towards me. Now imagine that creature looking you in the eye on your every move, like, oh, yeah. That's relaxing, right? Yeah, it sounds very relaxing. And if she managed to catch me, I will actually feel it in my shoulder. Do we have any Doctor Who fans? Awesome. For you who don't know who this scary creature is, go home and watch Doctor Who. This is an epic episode of Doctor Who. Yeah, Blink. It's called Blink. But my friends, this is not the future. This is now. We already have all these technologies. You can go and do this now. So I encourage you to go out there and find your platform and build awesome experience for your users. Thank you.